Hello, everybody. For those of you who haven't come across me before, I'm Julian Swann. I'm the Vice-Chancellor for Research, and it's my pleasure to be chairing this evening's lectures. Before I kick off, I'm just told to remind everybody that if the fire alarm goes off, it wasn't meant to, which means the exits are in the indicated directions. And just to also let you know that we'll be live streaming for our Birkbeck YouTube channel. Well, so that will be available subsequently. Whenever I get up here, actually, I always think, right, now, get going. It's the origins of the French Revolution. That's not, that's not it. I shan't do that. Instead, I'm going to be introducing, obviously, the sixth lecture in a series that we've been running as part of our 200th anniversary celebrations. And of course, just to remind you, forgive me if I say it again, but of course, in December, Birkbeck will be 200. Of course, for 200 years, Birkbeck has been at the forefront of providing education for all. Starting out with working people, obviously, in 1823, we were the first to introduce lectures and seminars for women. We have always had a very open attitude towards providing cutting-edge education for all, and that remains something after 200 years, which is crucial for it. Research all along has been at the heart of what we do. I'm still very proud as Pro Vice-Chancellor for Research to say that our academic colleagues are all committed to their research careers, and the research and the teaching that takes place is always at the forefront of whatever discipline it might be. We're proud of our research pedigree. If you think across the past over the last 200 years, just think of a few names that perhaps will be familiar to some of you. Elizabeth Penson, who was the first female Vice-Chancellor of the University of London, the first woman after a fellow of Cambridge. She got the first ever PhD from the University of London. She was a Birkbeck student in 1920. Helen Gwyn Vaughan, some of you will earlier on would have been in the council room and seen a very imposing portrait of Helen Gwyn Vaughan. Again, one of the first women professors in the country, a professor of botany at Birkbeck. I could mention Rosalind Franklin, J.D. Bernal, Eric Hobsbawm, and so many others who have adorned Birkbeck over the years. But what they and their successors all have in common is a radical, innovative approach to their research, and very crucially, I think, to shaping public debate. Birkbeck as a research institution punches above its weight. It's something that we've demonstrated time and time again in the various government research excellence frameworks run by Research England. We do really well, always, in a variety of subjects. But it's not just that we particular departments or areas. What you can see about Birkbeck, which I think is really distinctive about it for a relatively small institution, is that we cover the range of subjects from the creative arts through to STEM, through to hard science in neuroscience or biology, as well as creative writing, film, media, or whatever else you might think about. And that research is crucial to our strategy going forward. We're in the process of putting together a new research strategy at the moment. And one of the themes that came forward most strongly when we were talking to academic colleagues about how we were going to think about our research, one of the 5 themes that we identified was environment and sustainability. It's an area where we have excellence across the college, and therefore it's a real pleasure this evening to be able to announce that we will be launching the Birkbeck Centre for Environment and Sustainability. One of the themes I think that really will stand out about it, what makes it distinct from anything else you might spot in other universities, is it's got at its heart interdisciplinarity and collaboration, and this ability to bring together, perhaps one of the great things about a slightly smaller institution, we have this opportunity really to integrate our scientists with our social scientists and those working in arts and humanities. And that's what it will be doing. And you'll find that there'll be work going on in a whole range of areas, whether it be pollution and waste, food security and food sustainability, carbon storage, or whatever. We have academics working in all of those areas. And so it's something which is very important, I think, about the new centre. It's going to be academic, though, but it's also going to be working with our external partners. In a moment, I'm going to be handing over to Jack Roper, who was head of sustainability at Legal and General, and we'll be talking in more detail about some of the plans we have. So what I would say to you then is there's a lot of exciting things going on in terms of research at Birkbeck, and that sort of leads me into our lecture this evening. And it really is a great pleasure to introduce Nilufer von Bismarck, who is going to be speaking in a moment. Nilufer's got the most remarkable career, from being a stellar legal career with Slaughter and May, leading their financial markets group. She has also continued, and was just telling me a moment ago, is working currently as a visiting professor in legal studies at Oxford. She's also a non-executive director overseeing workforce and climate change for Legal and General. She's a trustee of the charity IntoUniversity, which is focused on access to higher education for those who are from disadvantaged communities and therefore often excluded from universities, something, of course, which again overlaps so closely with the mission of Birkbeck. And what Nilufer is going to be doing, I think, is bringing her personal insights in leadership, leading change within institutions, and applying it to the themes of environment and sustainability. Those themes, as I say, are resonant for Birkbeck, and so it's with a real great pleasure that I hand over to Nilufer, who is going to address the very difficult question, very difficult it looks to me, a more sustainable future, whose job is it?
Thank you, Julian. I found myself wondering as I was sitting there, Julian said that he really wanted to talk about the French Revolution. And I guess we could all set ourselves the task of trying to pull out of that incident in France what was sustainable about that. And I think there are a few themes there that we could draw on, inclusivity possibly, and equality, that all come out of something that happened centuries ago. Anyway, I'm not here really to talk about that, and maybe we can talk about that further later. So I want to start by thanking Birkbeck for the invitation to take part in this series of lectures celebrating 200 years of this really remarkable institution. And I'm really delighted that Birkbeck's bicentennial also marks the start of a new partnership, as Julian has mentioned, between two organisations that I see of really similar pedigree. Both Birkbeck and Legal and General are long-term institutions. We're a little bit younger, but not by much, 23 years. And it's not simply a matter of age, but also one of character and outlook. Legal and General has built its value on long-term thinking. Our pension and insurance products and the investments we make are designed to improve the quality of human life. Birkbeck, meanwhile, is long-term by nature, as Julian has already mentioned. Since its foundation, it has championed lifelong learning. Time has shown the value of this approach because change is increasingly rapid in our times, often volatile and frequently unpredictable. And so people have to be supported and continually empowered to adapt to constant changes in technology, how we work, and how we organise our societies. A related point of similarity between Birkbeck and Legal and General is our shared belief in people's power to solve problems and seize opportunities. I see this every day in my role as the Legal and General board member representing the workforce.
Building a more sustainable future will require the mobilisation of significant amounts of capital, but ultimate success will depend on the expertise and commitment of our people. Partners are crucial in this, so institutions like Birkbeck will play an increasingly important role in preparing the workforce to build a more sustainable future with creativity, tenacity and hope. I'm equally pleased to be at Birkbeck this evening in my capacity, as Julian has mentioned, trustee of IntoUniversity, a charity dedicated to improving access to higher education and focused on inclusion.
We must all be focused on building a sustainable future. It's in everyone's interest to be concerned about the challenges of climate change and, more importantly, social justice, in particular with that lens of what the climate change is doing to particular areas of the world and communities in different parts of the world. We must, however, accelerate the scale and pace of change by realizing everyone's potential. In turn, business and academia both have a duty and opportunity to create the environment in which this can happen. First, we must create more opportunities for interdisciplinary, boundary-challenging thinking, and Julian touched on this also. Second, we must ensure that thinking and learning are enduring. And third, we must leverage diversity of thought and experience. I will come back to each of these points, but first let's ask, what do we mean by a more sustainable future? I see this as one where social and economic inclusion form the core of how we operate. This principle should influence the ways in which financial services firms allocate capital, how companies elsewhere in the economy produce goods and create value, how policy is made, and how academic and educational institutions prepare people to play their role and realize their full potential. Recent decades have seen social and environmental issues growing in prominence. The focus on sustainability is reflected in boardrooms and financial markets. It's illustrated by the growth of the ESG investing movement and by firms' incorporation of science-based targets, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and other sustainability measures into the heart of corporate strategy. Legal & General's shorthand for this is inclusive capitalism, where we deliver both positive economic and social results. And it is increasingly a focus in academia. Importantly, social and environmental sustainability is studied outside the traditional confines of environmental and social science departments. It now features in other faculties and schools, such as business management, humanities, and other sciences. Progress is being made in other ways. On climate change in particular, scientific ingenuity has given us solutions. Cleaner energy generation technology, more efficient conducting materials, and emerging carbon capture and storage technology, for instance. But society's collective response to the challenge of building a more sustainable future could be faster and realized on a larger scale. We have defined many of the technological solutions to climate change. We are beginning to build consensus about the connection between more equitable social and economic opportunities and better long-term outcomes for society and the planet. Economic mechanisms and financial markets are developing quickly to keep pace with and expand demand for responsible, sustainable investment. The opportunity before us now is to focus on people's power to create change at pace and scale. The philosophy behind our two organisations' partnership and the backdrop to my remarks this evening is this: that the next phase of building a more sustainable future is as much a people challenge as it is an economic and technical one. The first condition for building a more sustainable future is the creation of more opportunities for interdisciplinary, boundary-challenging thinking. I want to emphasise that this is not to decry expertise, which of course is more important than ever. The opportunity lies in creating new fields of knowledge by combining different kinds of expertise in new ways. It's also about resisting the temptation to believe that any one group has a monopoly on knowledge or privileged access to a set of answers. There are parallels here across Legal & General and Birkbeck. we have put significant resources and emphasis on building our people skills and capabilities to tackle social, environmental, and health issues. This has required adapting established business practices to promote better outcomes. For example, at Legal & General, we've built on the skills of our actuarial experts to improve how we manage the risks associated with climate change. Our accounting and corporate reporting teams have become adept at quantifying the importance of sustainability for our business and the positive impacts that we can have on social and environmental outcomes. Investment professionals across our portfolio have been working on new opportunities to fund assets which will create long-lasting social and environmental good. This has led us to funding projects from multi-billion-pound investments in urban regeneration to smaller investments in promising and ambitious new businesses. A great example of this is our stake in Kenza, a manufacturer of ground source heat pumps, a technology which will not only speed the transition to net zero, but promote energy security and reduce bills. Importantly, this is a collaborative effort, one that involves sharing expertise across disciplinary boundaries. Many of the people who led this change at Legal & General are in the room tonight, and I genuinely celebrate all of them. The idea of sharing knowledge in boundary-pushing ways has been at the heart of Birkbeck's approach since its foundation, when it was the first academic institution catering to working Londoners. The next set of boundaries to challenge is that between academic disciplines. Leaders need to be able to think nimbly across disciplinary boundaries, bringing a range of insights, perspectives, and intellectual techniques to bear on major questions, such as how to create a more sustainable future. The second condition for building a more sustainable future is the creation of more opportunities for long-term, lifelong learning. A system where education or learning ends at 18 or 21 is not going to be fit for the purpose of supporting people in adapting to constant changes in technology, the workplace, and society. It doesn't work for an aging population in a fast-changing technology environment, where we need to be thinking about the 100-year life. Nor should learning only take place in academic settings. That is why Birkbeck's mission of making learning accessible to more people throughout their lives, including alongside work, is so compelling. Whatever steps society takes next in its efforts to build a more sustainable future, there must be a focus on the importance of lifelong learning. Despite setbacks during the COVID pandemic, life expectancies continue to rise. 100-year lifespans are 127 times likelier in this country today than they were a century ago. The scale of change that any individual human life will witness is staggering, and their skills and knowledge will need to be constantly updated to keep up with the pace. It's clear that an education which isn't lifelong is a waste of human potential, as well as highly inefficient. The final condition for building a more sustainable future, and one where business, academic, and other organizations must play a more ambitious role, is much more deliberate inclusion. A successful, prosperous, low-carbon future can only be called just if it enables everyone, and not only those who are part of a traditionally empowered group, to own a stake in the agenda. I'm firmly convinced that business and academia can both do this if they are ambitious about their social purpose, and Birkbeck is particularly well regarded in this area. I'd like to conclude my remarks with just one example from Legal & General, which pulls together the strands I have explored in this lecture. Earlier this year, Legal & General invested in Impacta, a woman-led investment advisory firm. Our role is to support impactors' plans to invest in sustainable infrastructure projects in emerging markets. There are two infrastructure funding needs, and thus, there are two major objectives. One is practical, to address market failures in meeting emerging markets' infrastructure funding needs, and thus to improve lives. The second is rather more subtle. It's about using the power of education on climate change and impact investment to open the door for greater female empowerment. This investment echoes the philosophy we share with Birkbeck, that creating a more sustainable future cannot be the preserve of the few. It's very fitting that we're in a lecture theatre tonight, because I believe access to high quality education is one of the great enablers of change. I look forward to witnessing Birkbeck and Legal & General join in playing their part in realising this vision over the coming 3 years of our partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilufer. Like you, I'm delighted to be here at Birkbeck this evening as we officially launch the partnership between the college and Legal & General. Before we move on to the question and answer session, which I'm sure is something that the audience are very much looking forward to, asking Nilufer about some of her experiences, I did want to just give a little bit of background on the partnership and why we've decided to work with Birkbeck for the coming 3 academic years. And I was particularly struck by the comment Nilufer made there about the next step in our collective journey towards building a more sustainable future as being as much a people challenge as it is a scientific, technical or economic one. And in scoping out the partnership between Birkbeck and Legal & General, we quickly identified this as a shared belief which forms the basis of the ways in which we'll work together. And it also inspires what we want to achieve together. From the beginning, the question that both parties were asking and seeking to answer together was how we could create an inclusive group of agents of change, a cohort of leaders who are able to mobilise the human capital to which Nilufer alluded earlier in the service of building a more sustainable future. Legal & General has a long history of working with higher education institutions to create social good. In just one example of that, we worked with Edinburgh's Advanced Care Research Centre to help improve quality of life for older people. That's critical in a society which, as Nilufer said, is seeing increased lifespans. That 127 times more likely to be a centenarian now really illustrates that well, I think. And that's critical in a society where increased lifespans aren't always accompanied by improved healthy life expectancy. So that's just one example. So our partnership with Birkbeck is the latest example of mutually beneficial relationships with universities across the UK. Our track record with institutions like Manchester and Oxford includes significant investment in facilities, and that complements research programmes like the one we did with Edinburgh. But just as Birkbeck is no ordinary university, so I see this partnership as taking our engagement with the academic world in quite a new and fresh direction. The objectives of this partnership are fourfold. Firstly, and most importantly, we'll support Birkbeck in developing its sustainability curriculum, both undergraduate and postgraduate. And as Julian was saying earlier, that's a critical area of expansion for the college, and we're delighted to be working with them on making that real. Secondly, we'll create opportunities for Legal & General employees to share their knowledge, both with the academics developing the sustainability content and directly with the students at Birkbeck, both present and future. And it's great to see so many of my colleagues here tonight. I obviously have to give them all a shout out and say thank you for being part of this. Thirdly, the partnership will see Birkbeck develop and establish standards in sustainability education, which is very important if we're to embed this more firmly into curricula across the broader academic landscape. And finally, with an eye firmly on inclusion, we'll be funding bursaries for students from traditionally underrepresented backgrounds to access an education here at the college. Birkbeck's legacy of social mobility-focused inclusion is a perfect fit for this partnership, which is in part about aiming to widen participation in higher education. Social mobility is a good in itself, and it has positive economic effects. And Legal in General has a commitment to promoting long-term financial well-being, both through our products and investments, as Nilufer outlined earlier, which have an inherent social value, and also through the partnerships we build with fantastic institutions such as Birkbeck. Meanwhile, creating that new space for dialogue between academia, business, and civil society is a way for us collectively to open up more fronts in our struggle to limit the effects of climate change and to realise a more sustainable future. Legal in General has over the years focused additional resources and investment in the technologies and infrastructure which will be needed to accelerate that transition to net zero. Collectively, we have a clear moral duty and commercial incentive to ensure that the transition to a low carbon economy is not only swift and decisive, but that it's executed in a way which does not entrench social inequalities. Now, we don't have all the answers to how exactly that's going to be achieved, but we do know that part of the solution will lie in developing the skills of as many people as possible to be involved in leading the change. So we look forward to doing that alongside our colleagues at Birkbeck, which has a proven track record in research and environmental education and is looking now to develop its offer for that next generation of change makers. Embarking on a partnership like this is exciting and daunting in equal measure, and I'd like to thank both Julian, Rachna and Richard and all of the other colleagues that we've worked with so far at Birkbeck to get this partnership going. What we have on our side here is the power of two institutions which both see the urgent case for improving sustainability education, doing it at speed and doing it as inclusively as possible. The case for change, for focusing more of our economic efforts on the objective of building a more sustainable future, is unanswerable. The scientific and economic juries are in, but we will not have realised the full potential of that change if it is not inclusive. The old cliche of environmentalism being a middle-class luxury cannot persist any longer. And the separation of environmental from social issues is increasingly a false dichotomy. Precisely what a just transition looks like is largely still up for definition. But even that act of definition needs to be inclusive, drawing on a wide range of perspectives and delivered by people with the skills, knowledge, and dedication to put it into action. If the partnership between our two institutions can empower and inspire even a small part of that inclusive cohort of change makers who will champion this transformation, then we will know we've succeeded. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we can achieve together in the next 3 years. So thank you once again, Julian, and I'll pass back to you now for questions.
Well, thank you both so very much for those two marvellous talks. One of the advantages of being the chair is I get to ask the first question. So Nilufer, if I could sort of start with you. I mean, I like Jack, actually, I was struck by that phrase, people challenge. Now, that was the one that I'd noted down, and you beat me to it, Jack. You got that. And I think that's something which is crucial to this. And I suppose when I was thinking about it, you know, in order to make change within an institution, to bring about change, it's down to leadership style. And so I was interested if you could tell us more about your own experience of how developing a leadership style, how it is that you've been capable of affecting change, as you know, in the course of your career, and you know, what lessons, if any, we can learn from that.
Yes. So if I was to pick the successes and the failures, I think it's always a learning experience for each individual how to make the most of your own capabilities and capabilities of others. And you don't always get it right first time round, and I confess to not having done that. But if I was to pull out the key success drivers, I think one is culture, and actually finding ways that you yourself are behaving that you think are the right ways, say, leading in terms of the positive aspects of what you're doing, and not doing things that you will regret, and treating people fairly. So that aspect of it, the culture, and breeding that amongst people with whom you work by showing it yourself. And very allied to that is teamwork. So it's back to the word that we've been using a lot of, inclusivity, because you can't do anything alone, or you can't do it as well as if you have everybody coming with you. And everybody will bring a different perspective, and the value of that, the combined value of that, is far greater than if you're trying to do things on your own. And if you include people in that way, they want to do things with you, and they want to succeed, and they want you to succeed, and they want the goal of what you're seeking to get to the right place. And the final aspect linked to the inclusivity is diversity. And in the grouping of trying to get somewhere, trying to achieve a goal, trying to find different people and different approaches. And I don't by that mean necessarily one, race, religion. It could be those, it could just be different social background, it could be a different discipline, as we've talked about today, but it's being open to incorporating that into your own leadership goals, and doing it therefore together and getting the most out of everyone.
Thank you. I could follow up, but before I do, can I throw now questions open to the floor, and we can take questions from any angle that anybody wishes to raise with either Nilufer or Jack. Yeah. And we've got a roving microphone, I should have said, so that in case the acoustics are not as good as they. Houston, we seem to have a problem, I think. It's sort
of. I'm going to have to remember what I just said. Thank you for your talk. It was inspiring and interesting. I'm thinking with regard to prioritization of sustainability activities. In your experience and based on your knowledge and skills, what would you say is the highest priority item, if you could pick one particular thing? If not, then obviously what would be the highest priority items that you would begin with?
We'll do it together because we may have different views.
Yes, this will be a very interesting experiment.
So there's obviously the immediacy of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That sits there. We know that sits there. And so that has to be on the list, how you do that. But in my thinking, in particular in the last 6 months, I've started to worry much more about the sustainability angle. And by that, and if we're talking here, it's a given that we're doing this in an interdisciplinary way and across cultures, etc. But if you're looking at what the other things are that matter, I would pull out two. One is sustainability, so worrying about various things that are happening which aren't necessarily cured by the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, for example, the tiny microbes at the bottom of the sea that are slowly eroding and disappearing, which has an impact all the way up, throughout the planet, or the fact that we sit there with so much of our land as farming land, and how we're going to change that. So and that, I don't mean by that methane that is emitted by the cows, but actually the land that has been. So priority for me this now is to look at sustainability as well as, and I think everybody's coming round to that. I think there's a greater focus. And then the third key thing, and that I touched on this one when I spoke, is the horrible social imbalance, i.e. worrying about areas that are most affected and what happens to the people in those areas in the immediate future, and looking at worrying about, are they displaced, what's the economics of that, and how do they get helped as part of the overall solution. They would be my three.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of what you said, and I think part of the issue that we face is where on earth do you start, and because it is such a vast, thoroughgoing, interconnected problem. I think something that has done us a favour is the underlying principle of global warming and how that works is that it's a gas, or like a single family of related gases. There's one number and it needs to go down, which in itself is relatively simple. But of course, we know that the systemic changes that need to happen to make that work, economic, social, behavioural, scientific, are vastly complex. And so I think there is always a balance to be struck between taking a wide view that looks at the entire ecosystem and the entire system, but not doing that at the expense of, okay, so what on earth are we going to act on? And so I do always come back to, I think that the first thing is probably getting that carbon number down as quickly as possible, but not at the expense of thinking of all of the other systemic causes and effects of warming.
It was Jeff, I think, and then Jeff in front of us.
Thank you. Really appreciate the lecture. Thank you very much. I was intrigued by your framing of the discussion, and which is quite different to what you might call a more conventional framing, which is that what we need to do is have an industrial revolution to completely transform our economic system in favour of clean energy and a more sustainable economy in an economic sense. And once we've done that, in the old theory, we could worry about redistribution. But what we've learnt in the last couple of years, I think, particularly, for example, from the ULEZ experience, is that you can't do that sequentially. You have to take account of equity and redistribution as you go along, because otherwise there is too much resistance to change. So I wonder whether you could just comment on your three choices versus that more conventional analysis, and also in particular on what I would think personally as the current challenge around this topic, which is how do we simultaneously transform the economy while at the same time managing redistribution so that we bring people with us.
Yeah, please.
So I would say in my first choice there, the reduction of emissions, I would be incorporating the infrastructure needed to do that. So, transition to clean energy, carbon capture and storage, other things that are going to help with the reduction of emissions. So in that context, I agree with you. The equity element, I think it's unavoidable that we start worrying about that now and start looking at which countries are most affected and which countries are economically unable to create the right environment to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm not sure that we're that much apart, and it may be that I didn't express it well enough to get us to that same point. I don't know if you have anything to.
I think part of what you're talking about there is the model of change that came about as a result of the Industrial Revolution was, and I'm not a historian, Julian, so please do tackle me to the floor at any moment in this. And I think that the pattern followed there was very much more about capital commanding and controlling. And we know that that has some shortcomings because we're now living with the consequential results of the Industrial Revolution, actually. So it's an analogy, but it's also a part of the story. And I think that there is, to Nilufer's point, more that we could be doing to think about the lessons that we probably ought to have learned from that process and applying that to the challenge that now faces us. I think that's probably why that additional answer.
Jeff. Sorry, Jeff, we'll get to you in a bit.
Yes. Regarding sustainability, what would you say, how should academic, corporate, and government institutions deal with the technologically caused economic inequalities? Like, for example, unemployment due to process optimization. Is it actually possible to upskill people as fast as machines and software replaces them? And is it true that technological advancements like AI or quantum computing will create more jobs than they actually take, like the Industrial Revolution?
Well, so that's two different questions there, I guess, isn't it? So I think whether you're talking automation or you're talking loss of jobs, for example, in oil and gas industries, and what happens to those people, or are you talking automation? Automation driven by innovation in the climate field, which means that people lose their jobs. Well, there are arguments around that. One would hope that the development of new technologies will give rise to some other opportunities for people to shift. I mean, for example, we see it in some of what's being said in Scotland with some of the Labour Party's policies there as to what they're going to do to redeploy people in that area. I don't think we can be... It's a sort of inevitability that in some areas people will lose their jobs. And I found it the starkest when you look at China, because there's whole parts of the community that are involved in coal. I mean, vast elements of the land, all the people do there is mine coal. And what will happen to all of them? And where will they go? What will they do? But in China, they're already starting to think about the redeployment of those communities to go somewhere else and to look at what they do. And we've got to all use that discipline to the extent there's a heavily affected aspect of the transition. We're going to have to find ways to redeploy the skills. But you would have thought that once we start heading towards 2030, 2050, and if we really are successful in reducing temperatures to the levels that we need, that there would be some economies that are going to grow out of that will allow people to redeploy.
I think I think that's absolutely right. I want to pick up the point you made about whether we can develop people quickly enough to keep up with technology developing, which I think was the other half of your question, if you like. And I think we can, and I think probably what we need to focus on is what is it that makes human ingenuity and human knowledge and human abilities unique, and what cannot be imitated by machines. And I think that, probably we're in the Faculty of Theology now, but I think there is something about humanity that is unique and is inimitable by machine. So I think that the race is not to keep up with the development of technology necessarily. It's to ensure that what is special and unique about humankind is nurtured and developed. And I think that's what saves us from the machines, if you like. I hope that's my personal view.
Okay, right, there's one over here, and another one down there, and another gentleman over there. So several questions. So start over there.
Thank you, Nilufer. Thank you, Jack. I'm a Birkbeck employee, so thank you as well on behalf of Birkbeck for the partnership. One of the things you sort of touched on implicitly and a little bit more explicitly is the role of politics. You talked around sort of economic, social side of things, but I guess this is a partnership between private sector, organisation, academic institution. Two prongs to my question, really. What role does government play? And given that this is a 3-year partnership and we're going to be straddling a general election, what would your message be to either the current government or the incoming government as to how can they support a drive towards sustainability as a nation? So, yeah, 2 parts to the question. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly if you're looking at net zero, right, as a concept, or climate change, that doesn't have anything to do with electoral cycles. So I preface all of my comments by saying that what we know we need to do needs to happen agnostically to any political process that may be happening. So that's one thing. And I certainly think that the commitments that our firm has made and things that we're working on, that will largely, I would hope, continue no matter what the outcome of any election that may or may not happen in the next however many weeks or months may return. I suppose a message for an incoming government or a continuing government would be along the lines of continue to give us the clarity and certainty and the conditions in which we can get capital to do the work. So please just be clear, please be committed, please ignore your own electoral cycles. That may be the most difficult question, most difficult challenge, but give us the certainty, give us the clarity in which to do our bit and bring our bit to the party.
Yeah, and I think you're hinting at the tensions. If we look at what Rishi Sunak has done in the last weeks in terms of, it's coming back to that social element too, because if we've all got to buy new boilers and we've all got to do double glazing and we're all struggling with the expense, you can understand at a human level why those things might be postponed, where the government doesn't have the funding to be able to help. But at the same time, I think there's a finite period during which we have to get these things done, and it's just judging. I mean, luckily, all he's done is postpone some of these things rather than get rid of them totally. But it's a difficult dynamic to play with when you take it down to the human level and you take it down to each of us in this room, and when we've got to spend £1,000 on a new boiler and whether we can afford it. So it's very difficult, and of course the government can't fund all of these things at this present moment. So the answer is tough. I don't know what your answer would be to it.
Okay, now we've got several people have had their hands raised, and we've got time. I know it's starting to run out. So there's a lady at the front here, a gentleman there with the hat, and one of the gentlemen over there. So should we take questions? Let's take each question first. Perhaps if we take the 3 questions, and then and see where we are in terms of allowing responses. Sorry. Fire away, and then, if you can be relatively
shall I go?
to the questions, and then we'll take the questions and see if we can sort of answer them in a sort of a round robin at the end.
Cool, thank you. Thanks for sharing your thoughts today. My question, well, it might be a bit more directed towards Julian. I'm a current student at Birkbeck, studying in my second year of environment and sustainability, along with some of my fellow students in the room today. We are what you might say the next generation of change makers and those who might be responsible for creating a more sustainable future. My question is more related to how will this partnership benefit us directly now as we go into our second year and into our third year with our studies and our learning?
Okay, can we just take each question? There was one here at the front, gentleman over there, and then we'd better and we'd see if we can answer all the questions in the time we have.
Thanks. Jack, I was really struck by you talking about the false dichotomy between environmental and social issues. I think we often talk about the challenging social impacts that climate change and environmental change might have. Just interested in your thoughts on where do we see a kind of positive intersection between what we need to get done on the environment and sustainability side and the forces of social change that we see.
Perfect. And then there was a gentleman over there.
Thanks very much for an interesting discussion. I'm a former student here myself. You've spoken about sustainability. You've made specific references, I think, to climate change in particular and social justice. You've emphasized very strongly inclusivity, but with that comes different cultures, diversity, different value systems, different beliefs, different objectives, different measures. One person's success is another person's failure. Capitalism is a prime example of that. We've got zero-sum game where we have winners and losers. We've got individuals versus herd mentality. We've got differing priorities, and we've got mutual exclusivity. With that background, which makes up the world and human nature, do you see sustainability as more of the same? You've spoken extensively about change. You've spoken about changing climate, but the word sustainability to a lot of people means carry on, keep it steady, more of the same. I think I'd like to come away this evening with what you mean by sustainability of what. I recognize your references to climate change. I recognize your references to social justice, but human nature, history has never had social justice. We've never had constant climate in the history of mankind. So please be careful when we use climate change together with sustainability. Sustainability by some will mean more of the same, please. But you've spoken extensively about change. I think you need to give clarity on those two extreme poles, if you like. On the matter of, the gentleman Jeff asked the question, what do we expect from the next government? And you're saying, I got the word hope. You must be joking. You must be joking. And I'm disappointed with that response, to be honest. You're in a very strong position to influence, to advise, to guide governments. I think you've got the power, the muscle, the intellectual influence to do that. I would expect better than hope. And hope they do well. I hope they can be consistent. I hope they tell the truth. You must be joking, historically.
So
I'm sorry to be critical, but I really want to raise those points.
I absolutely didn't use the word hope.
Okay,
I said
my apologies.
Clarity.
My apologies. I took away the idea of hope of the future.
Well, if we can now move to answering the questions we've had. Was there anybody we've missed? One gentleman there. No, he's okay. So three very different questions. Yes. Who wants to go first?
I think you.
Oh, yes. In terms that's always good, isn't it? Yes. Pass it over to him. Yes. In terms of the question about the partnership, what we hope will be the case for current students. I mean, there are, obviously there are sort of two strands to the project. One which is very much looking at the educational side and the the work on our sustainability within the curriculum. That isn't something which I'm personally responsible for, so I don't want to sort of muddy the waters by attempting to explain how that will progress, although Jack may wish to jump in or not. In terms of the research side of it, we will be literally this term setting up the Centre for Environment and Sustainability. What I'm hoping that will do is integrate not just academic staff and our external partners, but also students. And one of the things that I'm very keen that we should be doing with all of our research centres is making sure that we have student representation on the steering groups and so on and so forth, and that students can actually feed in terms of, this is an area we wish to develop. We want more, whether it be training, whether it be lectures, whether it be some other form of workshop. We are open to those kinds of initiatives, and I'm very happy to talk to any students who might have ideas that they want to feed in.
Yes, the question here was about where we've seen the social.
Where do you see a sort of positive intersection between what we need to get done on environmental issues and how society is changing?
Yeah, so there's a one situation springs to mind here, and that is the effect that the cost of living crisis and specifically the price of energy has had in focusing people's minds on the importance actually of using fewer fossil fuels. That was a result of economic and geopolitical factors playing out in people's day-to-day lives. That has led, arguably, and I don't claim that this is universal, to a greater focus on actually how is it that we can use those global trends to reduce use of fossil fuels. And I'm talking at a very, very atomized level here. So we suddenly started hearing lots about, oh, I might quite fancy one of those ground source heat pumps, and oh, I might quite fancy some solar panels. So that's an example taken from a very specific moment in history with a very specific set of circumstances playing out with a very specific group of people in developed economies, particularly here. And I suppose the reason why I give a very specific example is to illustrate that the generality here is constructed from those very specific examples. And there is probably a degree of opportunism in that, which we, I think, should not be too proud to take advantage of. I don't know if you have any other examples that you wanted to.
No, I think that's, I guess, the one I talked about, Impactor.
Yeah.
It's a very similar idea there, that we're trying to find ways to fund agricultural infrastructure changes in societies where it's the women that are doing most of the work, and finding ways to empower them and fund the changes necessary. I think it's a very good intersection there. Okay, now, do we all define our view of what sustainability means? Would that be the best thing to do, all three of us? How about that?
Yeah.
As a parting shot.
I appreciate the diversity, but inevitably there'll be different views.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Well, I guess we can start with, Julian, when you were answering that question, you used the word sustainability quite a few times. So we could start with what it means in terms of the programme, and to you, what you think that it's going to give rise to.
I hope. Well, I mean, I think it'll give rise to a lot of things. I think probably one of the I suppose sort of central themes for me is the well, I think there are two things. One awareness within the institution and both students and staff, and to get us to engage properly with the concepts. I think that on one level is something that will be important. I think more significantly, though, what I would like to think is that the partnership that we're talking of developing isn't something that just becomes, you know, a 3-year project. It's something that actually we can build on over a longer period, and so that, you know, when next time we have a gathering like this, somebody, there's a gentleman at the back, asked me a question. Well, what is it going to mean for me? That we will have had an opportunity to say, well, look, over this period we have done 1, 2, 3, and it will become something that, you know, you will be aware of, I am aware of, and it's become embedded, if you like, within the institution.
Working definition of sustainability. Absolutely acknowledging what you said about different views. I was also struck by your comment on there hasn't ever been a single climate. So let's start there. I think for me, a system which is characterised by sustainability, or that could be labelled sustainable, is not necessarily about continuity. It is about creating a system in which human activity does not overwhelm natural systems, and where there is a good opportunity for people to live in conditions that afford them dignity.
And I would just extend Jack's comments there, but actually when we say sustainability, we're not talking about keeping things the same, not remotely. We're talking about the changes necessary to sustain a world in which we can all live comfortably, and which you know, our children and our grandchildren and so on can enjoy, in the same way that before 1815 people had more hope of doing than they did post 1815, even though they didn't realise it at the time.
Right, I'm going to have to draw things to a conclusion, but I mean, I think you'll see we could very easily stay here for a lot longer, particularly if we started to engage with not just definitions of sustainability, but, you know, the questions of what that will mean in terms of social justice, and indeed how on earth is a project of this scale actually accessible for one institution or 2 institutions now in a partnership. They're vast topics. I mean, I'm so grateful for the audience, for their questions, and of course to Jack and to Nilufer for their contributions. And so I would like us all to thank them again, and we will be reporting again in due course on the progress of the partnership. So thank you all.